Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Toby Eunice of the Gypsy Kiss. Stick with us a couple of seconds, and we will have a conversation about whether or not, or how far, could a man dealing with terminally ill cancer travel to hide his treasure. And welcome back to our show tonight. We've got a great panel for you, and we've got a great question that I believe needs an answer, and hopefully by tonight we'll give you an answer, and if not an answer, something to think about before you go to sleep tonight, okay? So first of all, I'd like to go around the room and have our panel members introduce themselves, and Jono, let's start with you.
Hi, I'm John Jones, known as Brit Chaser on YouTube and Hint of Riches, and you will soon be seeing me release a set of videos for new starters on the chase.
Oh, a set of videos.
Yep.
So they're going to be topical in their nature, huh?
Absolutely. And thought-provoking.
And that's based on your experiences in Yellowstone?
More so the research in the last 4 months.
Very interesting. So, Christy, I'm going to ask you to take your microphone and just push it down a little tiny bit. There we go, right there.
Like that?
Yeah, perfect. Okay. Sean Martinez.
Sean Martinez, Figuring Out Forrest on YouTube, on Facebook, and at Gmail. I'm a former homicide detective in search of Forrest Fenn's hidden treasure.
Thank you, sir. Shelley Carney.
And I'm Shelley Carney with the Gypsy Kiss, and I also have my own channel, The Softer Side, and that's at thesofterside.me. And Toby and I will be live again next Tuesday.
Because you're going where?
I'm traveling tomorrow. We're going to Virginia, so my daughter and her boyfriend can get married.
At a beautiful time of the year to be in Virginia with all those deciduous trees. K-Pro?
Hannah Riches is my forum, and The Raven's Nest is my YouTube channel.
And last but not least, Matt Brewer.
Hi, my name's Matt Brewer, and I'm also known as Matt Brewer, so I don't have any weird names like that, but I guess that'll work. And you can find me at breweraerial.com, and you can see some of the places I've been searching on that channel. If you take a look down at the bottom, it got some aerial videos that I've taken from a Mavic Air drone and a couple of the high-end drones as well.
Oh, did you buy yourself a Mavic Air?
Yeah, I got a Mavic Air. I got several
very nice
DJI and unique drones.
Yeah, the Mavic Air is just a very nice drone. What's that noise there? Getting a lot of background noise. What's going on? And then finally, as you guys know, I'm Toby Eunice with the Gypsy Kiss. Shelley Carney is my partner. We also have another channel called The Softer Side, and I'm very grateful to Jono for joining us tonight because it's 2 o'clock in the UK, and he's done this more than once, and I'm going to have to find a way to be a lot more grateful for him actually doing this. But I think part of it is he just enjoys the conversation, the discussion. Okay, so you should have seen by now the program that we produced yesterday where Shelley had done some research regarding the period around 1988 where Fenn was diagnosed with cancer, and she came to a number of conclusions, and I thought they were right on point. I'm going to summarize a couple of her points, but interestingly, I want to read a comment from our blog. So every time I write one or we publish one of these videos, I post it to our blog, and people comment on them. So I want to read one of the comments that was written below the blog post in which we saw the video that Shelley did yesterday. So these are the 4 main points that we tried to make yesterday. By 1988, Fenn had identified his special place. He knew where his special place was. Number 2, his diagnosis of cancer in 1988 was the impetus for building the treasure, hiding it, and dying next to it, at or in his special place, depending on how you define that. Leaving behind a poem with clues, because at that time there was no sense that there was going to be a book. It was simply, as a matter of fact, I think in the preface to Once Upon a While, I think it's there, and I'm sure you guys can correct me if I'm wrong. It was mentioned that he was planning to leave the poem in the car or at the Denver Museum, et cetera, that it would have been the 10th clue. So our conclusion is that with all of that in mind, the treasure is in New Mexico, which might be confirmation bias on our part, because we've always believed that the treasure, well, not always, for the most part, we believe that the treasure was in New Mexico. We've gone to other places to look, but every time we look, we come back going, no, it's in New Mexico. But let me read to you this comment, because I want to have our guys, the panel, start with it. And Jonah, I'm going to start with you. It says, so this is in response to Shelley's video from yesterday. Shelley, in spite of my comment above, he had made he could question confirmation bias in a previous comment. He says, in spite of my comment above, I'm still fairly confident that you are correct that the treasure is in New Mexico. You had me at where warm water salt, which I thought was an interesting way to put it, and somewhere in the mountains north of Santa Fe. Also, it recently occurred to me that this story of Fenn's about hiding the chest and throwing himself down on it and dying could very well be a hint or clue that says, quote, don't go where a terminally ill cancer patient couldn't go. So, Jono, why would I go to a place to look for the treasure where a terminally ill cancer patient couldn't go?
Do you know, it's really hard for me because everything I'm reading now, I see Fenn in a very different light in the book. So I think Fenn, the first book, the first memoir, Thrill the Chase, he is painting a picture of there's a story, him as almost a caricature of himself and his life. Some of the stories are made up, some of them are based on real stories, but he's created almost a legendary vision of something that's based on him. So I find it really hard to figure out which is true and which isn't now. So I think, what was your original question again? Sorry. Oh,
you're muted, Toby.
Excuse me. So the original question was, why should I go look for the treasure in a place where a terminally ill cancer patient couldn't go? Right? It's yep. Like the first theory that we have. Don't go looking for the treasure where an 80-year-old man couldn't, 79 or 80-year-old man couldn't go. He said that himself. Paraphrase. So the question I have is, why should we look for the treasure in a place where a terminally ill cancer patient couldn't go?
Okay. It's 2 in the morning.
We're going to be very forgiving.
So my train of thought there was very much around, when he actually hid or buried the treasure, he was well clear of that. Whether he thought of the special place or not beforehand, or how far beforehand, I'm not so sure on. But I think because what he says often, I see clues in what he says. So in other words, when he says something, I'm tending to think, what's he really trying to say? What's not on the face of it? I'm inclined to go with that person's view of that actually it is just a hint or a clue to not go where someone, or not go that far, and no more than that.
Well, I'm actually interested to hear your thoughts about the research that you've been doing and evaluating the contents of the books and coming back, it sounds like, with a very different perspective of Fenn that you had prior to this. So considering the research that you've gotten to at this point, how does that impact what the story of terminal cancer? And not that we doubt he had, there is no doubt he suffered terminal cancer. I mean, he suffered cancer that had been diagnosed as terminal. But then that was the impetus, according to the book, it was the impetus to start building the treasure and planning to hide it. So based on what you know right now, can I trust that story is accurate, not accurately represented? We know it's represented. Based on your research, can I trust that story is accurate?
Yeah, no, I think that bit is, and it forms a good basis from where he probably did conceive this idea. I think, in contrast, though, what's written in The Thrill of the Chase, it comes part and parcel with a set of puzzles in a poem, and I mean, he emphasizes, I think it's in the preface, isn't it, that the treasure story is true. He goes out of his way to say that. And then obviously he talks about, people accounting stories from the past being 85% true. I think he's hinting at, this is part and parcel a puzzle based loosely on my life, was conceived in the worst parts of my life. But not to take it much more. The reason I come to that conclusion as well is looking through a lot of the scrapbooks. I can see a lot of him reaffirming, saying the same things a number of times. And when you see that, for me, the book turns into a completely different thing. Where originally I started looking for 4 hints, something like that. I think it's coupled tightly with solving the poem. And that's what he intends it to be. And on the face of it, like the poem looks very simple on the face of it, so does the book look like a memoir. But there are some stories in there that either, I mean, I originally read it as if it was a slightly eccentric old man. I think those that know him very well know he's smart as anything, and he really isn't that. But that's the image he's putting across, it as part of this story that's coupled with the puzzle.
All right. So, Matt, let me go over to you because I know you've spent some time in this research area as well. Why would I go where a terminally ill cancer patient couldn't go to look for the treasure?
Well, I'm going to have a short answer to that, and that is I wouldn't. I wouldn't go in a place where a terminally ill patient couldn't go.
Well, then the second question is, can we assume then that this story that was told around the 1988 period is accurate and really does impact how you see your search for the treasure?
It does. It absolutely does. And furthermore, we know that there's treasures at least 5,000 feet, So he's got to figure these things in to the equation, even back then, right? He knows his special spot back then. So he's got to think about getting to this spot without being detected, without leaving records, without all of those things come into play. And it just, you've got to think that he knows that with that dying gasp, he's going to be in the worst possible condition that he could be in. And so thinking through that, I absolutely, and being above 5,000 feet, that would be even more taxing. So I do not look for anything that would be, more than a 6-hour drive, and 6 hours would really be stretching it. I think it's within a couple hours drive, to be frank, but I wouldn't look in areas that 80-year-old man with terminal cancer couldn't go,
because that puts a different dimension on it. It's one thing to say, don't look where an 80-year-old man couldn't go, right? Because that's when he hid the treasure. That's how old he was when he actually hid the treasure. That's one dimension. A second dimension is don't go where a terminally ill man had planned, not right. Or go to where a terminally ill man had planned to go, and that's a completely different dimension. Okay, right. So let me go over to you, Christy. The question is, and you decide how you want to answer this. Why should I go look for the treasure where a terminally ill cancer patient couldn't go?
Well, I'm going to go Shelley style, and I'm going to throw out a couple of quotes.
Ooh, yeah.
So I got the Tuesday show, so I got to prep a little. So there's a couple quotes that I wanted to throw out. One of them is, there was no other hiding place that he would have ever considered. So I don't think when he originally thought of the final place, he was thinking, which place would I be able to go to when I'm terminally ill? And I will say, I happen to agree right now it's in New Mexico, but I'm playing devil's advocate on some of the data that I've been trying to get, just to always play the other side.
Wait, before you go forward, yes. say your quote again. There's no other hiding place that was ever considered. Right.
So whenever he had that place, whether it was 13, 20, 40, 1988. He had that place in mind. So it wasn't that place in mind when he was terminally ill necessarily. It could have been the first time he went to that place when he was 13. So that could mean that he's not anchoring it then on, am I able to get there when I'm terminally ill? And I want to throw out two. Did you have
Go ahead.
Question?
So, well, let me ask. I just want to make sure I understand. Sure. Was the place, let's assume for a moment that the place he identified as a special place happened when he was 13. Did it change between the time he was 13 and the time he was 58?
In my opinion, no. My opinion,
right.
Whenever he first saw it, I don't think he first saw that place in 1988.
Right.
I think he's always found it special. He's never said when, but that. So let me throw out a couple of other things.
All right.
So he's this pilot, and he has the quote that last Saturday Shiloh rented a plane and flew me to Suzanne Summers' home in Palm Springs. The Curtin, Mike Douglas, he packed all the items and personally delivered it to his front door. So though we think of a 6-hour drive, do we need to think of maybe a 2-hour plane flight? Because this is a guy that is eccentric, is eclectic, and jumps on a plane at a moment's notice. And which one's easier, to be in a car for 6 hours or to jump on a plane for an hour for a skilled pilot? So I throw those things out just to be ornery.
The plane that you think has the potential to have been jumped upon or into, when you think of that aircraft, are you thinking a privately held aircraft or a commercial aircraft?
I think privately held. I know that Shiloh went and sold a plane down to like Guatemala or somewhere. I saw a picture of it, and I think it's a little propeller plane. I haven't really thought about it, but I'm thinking a little propeller plane, and he's able to just jump on and go if he needs to. Maybe it's still an hour's drive. Like, I think of New Mexico for different reasons. I think this was an interesting conversation, or pieces and research and quotes that were brought up. But that wasn't the reason that I have now moved to New Mexico, and I firmly believe now it is New Mexico. So,
and the aircraft that you're describing as Fenn having taken when he hid the treasure, is when he actually hid the treasure. We're talking about 2010, correct? Or
well, it could be.
Are you implying that was also his plan in 1988?
Well, no, I'm more throwing out from yesterday the different quotes of, here is why it needs to be so close to New Mexico, at least the state line. I'm more thinking of it, if it is where a terminally ill man, we know it couldn't be long distances, but long distances vary based on the type of transportation. You get a lot further in different types of transportation. And he said sedan, but does that mean that he didn't fly there before he got into the car?
The sedan.
So those are things that I want. Maybe got into a train, and you can take a train that far. So, and I also look at terminally ill and think, I think Anon said this, terminally ill doesn't necessarily mean that you can't walk, you can't function. It means your body is giving out on you, but it's not giving out on you in a way that you can't make that half-mile walk. And I think it is Shelley said it yesterday, about a half-mile walk. So that's the other piece. So again, I think New Mexico for different reasons, but this one, the travel could have been in so many different ways. That's where I go, I'm not sure if that's the rationale I use. But again, I still agree with New Mexico.
All right. So Shelley, I'm going to jump over with you, make sure that we don't have any, I'll come back for you for questions. Sean Martinez, I'll ask you the same question, but you choose how to answer. Why would I go where a terminally ill cancer patient couldn't go to look for that treasure?
Well, in my opinion, it depends on the perspective of the terminally ill cancer patient at the time of deciding to hide the treasure. Now, in this case, it's Fenn. We do know he was terminally ill. He was going through treatment. It would have been a one-way trip for him going in. If he was, his plan was to lay on the treasure or nearby it and die with it, it would have been a one-way trip in. And if you look at the background of Forrest Fenn, the type of person that he is, for the doctors to tell him you're not going to make it, or these are your chances and this is it for you, he's the type that, well, why can't I beat cancer? Same with the chest. Well, same with the treasure and his treasures. Why can't I take it with me? Why can't I walk 1.5 miles or 2 miles into my special spot and die, or die trying to do that? So I think it's hard to say that he couldn't do it, because it appears to me, based on what I know of him and my investigation into him, he would give it a shot. He would try, just like with hiding this chest. Now, for a person who is going through treatment for cancer or has cancer, and they're going through that, anything over 8,000 feet will significantly increase the inability to continue. It'll make it that much more difficult for that individual to function compared to being at a lower altitude. So it's difficult for me to say that he would not have attempted it anyhow. Now, the logistics in that are that's the difficult part. Parking your car or maintaining secrecy as you go about attempting this final feat. That is the difficult part, and I believe Fenn did know that, including the day that he hid the chest. However, if it was a common location that was frequented by him, it would have been very easy for him to navigate to that location on his own that day. Now, considering different items of information I've picked up over time, it appears that his wife didn't even realize he was gone until he got back. So with that information, now some say she may have been in a hotel, just based on the perspective given through that information. It sounds to me like he left home as usual and returned home, and perhaps he told her he had gone fishing, and he may have after hiding the chest, or before or during. So in regards to him being terminally ill, the type of man that he is, and would have been at 80 years old when the book was released in 2010, it appears to me that it would have been a lot easier then than when he was being treated back in 1988, which may have been one of the reasons, contributing factors to prevent him from going out and hiding it then. And of course, as we all know, he did get better.
So let's take it back to 1988, and I agree with you in the sense that he developed a plan. He started putting the treasure together. He may not even at that point have found the actual chest that he put in the treasure, because this was 1988. He thought he was going to die. He was going to go out. He was going to hide the treasure in his special place. And then, as he says, as Moby Dickens, it all got messed up because I got well. So now he's got this lifetime ahead of him. He doesn't know how long. Cancer patients don't take, at that point, you don't take life for granted. He goes into the 90s looking for people to help write his memoir. He gets busy with other books that he's writing in the late 1990s and the early 2000s, including several books that each of us has purchased. The San Lazaro book, which included all that research that he did at San Lazaro in the 1990s, resulting in the book that was published. Then he gets around 2010. He's 80 years old, the point at which he and Eric Sloan had probably talked about more than once, that 80-year-old significant point in your life, and says, now is the time to hide the treasure. Can we, and I'm going to, Matt, I'm going to go back to you on this one. What are the chances that the point that what had changed between 1988 and 2010 was three things? Number one, the contents and the of the chest and the chest itself. Number two, the logistics of hiding it and then being able to walk away from it, which is very different. And number three, the publication of the book and the poem. All of those things are different in 2010 than they would have been in 1988. The question is, how different is between those two periods, how different is his mindset, and B, the special place in which he would have hidden a treasure and lay down to die next to it. So I'll let you answer that. What's the difference?
What's the difference as far as the treasure location? Would it have? He already said there was never another consideration. So I don't think anything changed from that perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then the second question was.
So he's got a poem. Back in 1988, he had a poem, and we can, through things that he said, assume that all that we would have gotten then is a poem that he left on the front seat of a car someplace. Denver comes up in Once Upon a While, but now we have a book with what he calls hints, and what he calls clues are in the poem. Mm-hmm. To me, the things that changed between 1988 and 2010 were superficial. What we had in 1988 was a treasure that he was going to hide in a special place. What we had in 2010 was a treasure that he was going to hide in a special place, and then there were all these embellishments.
Right.
Right.
I don't think anything changed. I really don't. He planned to put it in that spot, and I think he thought through that spot as he was pondering putting this chest out there. He thought through the logistics. He thought through how am I going to cover my tracks to, this treasure. I think he really did a good job of thinking through those things, and down to not letting my wife know exactly when I hit it, and she didn't even know, like Sean just said, she didn't even know that he was gone until he got home. So presumably he came home a little bit later than normal. So I don't think anything really changed from that perspective. The difference in time really didn't make a difference.
All right. So, Christy, let's go back to the comment that you made, the possibility that he could have gone beyond what I would have imagined a terminally ill cancer patient could have traveled. Let's say we're in 1988, right? Not that we didn't get as far as 2010. That the vision that he had for himself was, I'm close to the end. I've explained to my family how I want to do this. They don't approve, but I'm going to do it anyway, and I'm going to go to my special place and die. Describe that, and you said there was a potential for getting on an airplane, etc. So what I'd like you to do is describe that scenario to me from the time he's in his vault looking at the treasure and packing it up. Because maybe as a 58-year-old, even though he was terminally ill, he might have been able to carry it in one, right, instead of making 2 trips. So tell me about that day.
Here's the hard part for me. I actually think he got into a car. But I haven't ruled out the other states and the possibility of a plane, of a train, of, I mean, he's not going to walk 8.25 miles. So I do think he got into a car. So the hard part for me is that's the piece that I just haven't ruled out. I think it was compelling information, but not enough to say I can't put a plane in the scenario. I don't like the plane scenario because I think that records would have to be altered. I think it was easier to be like not seen when in a car. But I do, if it's okay, I really love your question so much because this is where I think things are going to break loose. You said, what are the 3 things? Contents, logistics of getting and hiding and walking to the spot, and the book. I think the book has shenanigans in it, and we all know it. He's misspelled so many words. He has so many previous books. I don't think we can figure it out from the book. The logistics, I don't think we can get that until we crack the poem. I think it's all about the contents of the chest, and that's the one thing that we are all missing. I think that has changed over time. I think there's hints there, and I think we've all been missing it. We need to get back in the box. Which box? The treasure box.
The chest.
Wow.
That is my thought. That's my big aha.
Mm-hmm. So there is some, as my friend Sean would call it, evidence out there of the contents of this chest. There are early images that people have used to propose the idea that the treasure was never buried, etc. They're what we believe is contemporary to the 2010. So you think that there's a possibility that there's something in the differences between the early images at the images that could have been made as early as 1988, right? And the images that were made in 2010, where he had 22 years to think about what was going into that treasure chest. You think there's a possibility there's something in there that could be helping us. What is it?
Yeah, I mean, there's one high resolution picture that's been put out that has this big thing on it that says, do not post anywhere without permission. I had to get permission from Forrest, and thank you, he gave it to me to put it even on Thor. Why is the only high resolution picture? Why hasn't he put out more pictures? Why isn't there more information out there? I think we're missing it. And I think that there is information out there for clever enough to get it. And we need to be more clever than the clever little guy that Forrest Fenn is, and I think we can. But that's the piece that I think is the most key.
Sean Martinez, before I go over to you so you can address that from the detective's perspective, Shelley has her hand up, so let's take a question from the room.
All right. Well, this is from Michael Elder for AGK and the panel. Forrest said he planned his trip up till the last detail. Couldn't that very well be the issue about him being too sick to hide the treasure by himself?
Yeah, I think so. Room, let's go back to the logistics of this. So if he claims that he had planned every detail of hiding the treasure, one has to, the question has to, you have to resolve is when he makes, from now on, at least that's how we're viewing it, from now on, you have to ask yourself, is he talking about 1988 or is he talking about 2010? So when he says, I'll go back to you, Sean, because I want to ask the two questions. I want you to tell me what you think about Christie's premise that we're missing something in the treasure chest. But before you get to that, what I'd like to is it important to be able to distinguish every time Fenn says something, is he talking about the period of 1988 or 2010? So when he says something like the questioner just asked, you know, he planned every detail. What period is he talking about when he says that?
Well, I think he did it for both. Initially, the 1988, which from that period until 2010, it appears to me that the idea of the chest and the items in it were almost like a back pocket plan of his to go out with a bang. Should the cancer reappear over time and he only gets so much time to live, that's something that he had in the works to do. Now, early on, it may have just been a poem that all of us would have gotten. We all may have just gotten that poem on the front seat of the vehicle, or perhaps there would have been time for it to be published. But over time, it developed. He had more time to write the book. He had more time to change up the poem. I'm sure in 1988, the version of the poem that we would have gotten would have been significantly different than the one that was released in 2010. So 1988 initially, but over time, 1989, 90, and all the way through every year, I believe it was evolving, and we would have gotten something different at the time should the cancer had returned or he got bad news in regards to the cancer. So in 1995, that chest, the contents would have been different, in my opinion. The poem would have been different, in my opinion, than it was when it was released and in 1988. So the context of the time frame and the timeline has evolved over time, and Fenn knows, and perhaps he took notes over time of what was in it, but knowing him, he probably just knows, hey, back in the 90s, this is what was in the chest, and this is what's in it now.
So, Jono, I'm going to hit you with, but now I've got two things, right? So, Jono, first of all, what do you think of Christie's hypothesis that there's something in the difference between the early treasure chest and the treasure chest that was hidden that could provide us some information?
Well, you know, I think there could be something in that. I've always thought, why does he list things out in the way he does? It's a little bit boring the way he does that. So that, knowing him the way I think I know him now, I think there's something in that. That gold frog's got to have something to do with this, hasn't it? I think in terms of the contents of the chest changing, I think he said that that's happened, hasn't he? What was the other question?
Well, it was because it was going to evolve. That was the only one. The second question I was going to ask you is, Sean has proposed a theory that we have the 1988 period and 2010 period, right? And one could list how Fenn's perception of his plan. What changed was Fenn's plan. Between 1988 and 2010, the plan changed, right?
Yep.
What were the things in that plan that couldn't have changed, that didn't change?
Okay. You've got to bear in mind, I don't buy the story. I think.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay.
Story as well. So, first thing, so if we believe what Douglas Preston said, that the final clue was in his car in Denver. First issue I've got with that is the clues have to hone you down to a specific place. So unless it was literally steps away in that car park, which it clearly wasn't going to be, how could that be the last clue? Unless there's some shenanigans and you have to go around the poem twice or something, or 3 times, you know. Let's assume you don't. That doesn't make any sense. I think the poem, if it took 15 years to write, early doors, he wouldn't have tinkered with a few words over 15 years. He's crafted it, and again, I'm back to, I don't buy the whole story. So I think it has just taken a long time. That's convenient, and I also don't buy that he would have died with the chest. I mean, how do you have that conversation with your family, with Peggy? You know, you'll never see me again. You'll never know where I've been laid to rest to come and pay your wishes. He wouldn't do that to her. So I think that's just part of his made-up story as well.
So we actually had somebody propose that idea on our blog today in one of the comments from Shelley's video. Matt, let me go over to you and get a sense of how much of the story that relates to that 1988 period, what percentage, I guess, is from that 1988 period that he describes to us, have you bought into, and or we shouldn't buy into?
I tend to look at it from that 1988 period. He says that, let's see, I wrote a couple notes down. He said, so he had the first statement, he said there was never another consideration. And then after that, he says, with my last breath, throw myself over the chest. So I just look at that statement, and to me, that says he's thinking about his health at the time, at the 11th hour, right? He would wait until he knew for sure he was done, right? He's not going to do it at the 9th hour. He's going to wait until at the last possible point. So he's considering, and since that spot didn't change, and he's thinking about, regardless of the poem and all that other stuff, he's thinking about, can I get to this spot? Can I make it there? This spot I know is over 5,000 feet. I know, you know, it's going to be a tough hike. I'm going to have this gold in this chest and so forth. So I'm looking at it from that perspective. He thought he was going to throw himself over that chest and dare us to find it. So that's the whole context. What's changed with the poem and so forth, I don't know that is that relevant, because the location hasn't changed, and he assumed that he was going to be in the worst condition that he has ever been in, and he knew that he could get to that spot with at least one last gasp left and hide it.
That one last mission is how I refer to it. So, Christy, you've had a lot of contact with Forrest in the past several months. I feel like when you describe him, you've got a real good sense of who the man is. If you hadn't known him by the fact that he hid a treasure and he published some books about it, and he's asked you to do some favors related to all of that, if he, as you know him now, if he had told you a story about his bout with terminal cancer at the age of 88 and his plan to fill a box full of valuables and then hide it in the mountains north of Santa Fe and then lay down and die next to it so that his bones would eventually become part of that that visage, the place where it was. If he told you that story and you didn't know he actually had hidden a treasure in 2010, based on what you know about him today, what parts of that story, what percentage of that story would ring true to you?
Okay, so I'll give a little context to my answer.
All right.
And then I'll give you my numbers.
All right.
If you've ever sat down and just listened to Forrest Fenn stories, they are magical. He knows how to spin a story in such a way that taking some of the facts. So my answer is like 85-15. That's what that's going to be my answer.
Which is what he says, right?
Yes, exactly. And that's why I use that. But those 15% is really critical, and it makes a story become a fabulous story and changes stuff enough that it makes it not really accurate. But if you've ever seen him tell the story, and I've had the pleasure of taking or going with several different searchers where I've heard some of the same story several times, and he's consistent. And I know a few of the things I'm like, I don't think that was exactly, but he's consistent because he knows how to tell a story that just mesmerizes a room. And so when you hear the stories, you just go, wow, yeah, the fish was that big, even though we know it really wasn't. So I say 85-15, but the 15, it's like are the most critical. He knows his shenanigans. When he talks, when a searcher will say, oh, my WWWH is here, and he'll roll his eye. I mean, he has it all. I think he's all calculated. But I do think that there's enough accuracy in his stories. So I say a vast majority of it is accurate. It's always based on accuracy. But 15% is just that guy knowing how to spin a story, and that's the shenanigans part. And he likes he likes to fool the room. So that's my 85-15, but that's my long answer.
And that's fair, because I'm going to come back and ask you a follow-on question to that. Does the 85 that's accurate and unembellished include the plan to go to his special place and die? But don't answer that now, because I'm going to go back to Shelley and say, Shelley, you've got some questions from the room.
Okay. So we have a couple of questions. Are you hearing me?
Yes, we are.
Yes.
Okay. My connection's a little spotty tonight. So we have Mr. Winger asking, if he originally planned to hide the chest in 1988 or thereabouts, then why did he wait till 2010 to actually hide it? And Jan Schultz is asking, could we get a timeline on the facts of his illness and hiding, etc.?
All right. So, Jonah, let me start with you. And I'm going to answer Jan's question first. To the best of them, so we've written, and we have a YouTube video out that's a large-scale timeline from 1972 to 2000, and I think when we did it is 2017. To the best of my knowledge, I don't know that anyone has, if they have had a conversation about that 1988 period, the story that comes out is pretty much the story that we're all dealing with, right? If you want to hear as accurate as it gets, go to Moby Dickens and listen to the way he tells the story at Moby Dickens. I think that's what everybody is dealing with, or has in terms of information. There may be something out there, but I'm not aware of it. Is anybody else in the room aware of something that's more detailed for that period? No. So go back to your first question from Mr. Winger. Shelley, could you repeat that for me?
Basically, if he planned to hide the chest in 1988, why did he wait till 2010 to actually hide it?
All right. So I think we all know the answer. So, Sean, let me start with you on that question. If he planned to hide it in 1988, why did you end up waiting till 2010 to actually hide it? Because everybody should know the answer to this question.
Sure. Well, I believe it was something that gnawed on him over time. He had reached the age of 79 or 80 years old, which was significant to him based on his conversations that he's had in the past, and he stated in the book. But I believe, a different angle on that would be the sense of urgency. The sense of urgency for him to get this thing done. A year prior, there was the raid on his house, on his home by law enforcement. No telling what was documented, what was specifically searched for or required or acquired by them and taken into evidence. That was a violation of his private space. Now, it may have been justified in regards to law enforcement's perspective and their warrant to do so, but all of these people, unwelcome, just came into his home, including, had the chest been in the home in 2009, where his treasure was. So to me, it appears that that sense of urgency for him to get this chest out of the house, if it was still there when in 2009, there's the possibility that it was already hidden. However, if it was still there, and that leans me more towards that it was still there in 2009, it was time to get the treasure out there, time to get it hidden. The time was right. He was 79 or 80 years old. He had been writing this book. It was almost complete, whereas over time it had been slowly progressing. Now it was almost done. The sense of urgency and completion was there. So in addition, he may not have known how much longer he had to live. He's almost 80 years old now. When he was young, and as a kid would say, that's an old man. So get it done while he has time. The sense of urgency, the push by the pressure into his personal space in his home, I believe, flushed him out and got him out there to hide it.
Flushed him out. I like that phrase. So I want to ask you a quick question, and I'd like a short answer if you can, before I go on to the others, because I've always been curious about this. If you were an FBI agent along with some agents from the BLM, and you had walked into Forrest Fenn's house looking for what they believed to be were illicitly acquired artifacts, and one of the things you asked him to do was show your vault, and in that vault there was a chest filled with these objects, all these valuable objects, regardless of when it happened, would you have walked out of there without that chest as some sort of evidence?
Well, it depends on if it was the items in the chest or the chest itself were included in the search warrant. The documentation would have specific verbiage as to what could be looked for and where it could be contained. So if you're looking for an item that is very, very small, of course, your scope of search is a lot larger. But if you're looking for a very large item that would not fit in a chest, it would be hard to justify that in any case. Now, depending on what exactly they were looking for, I know that based on how many search warrants I've done and looked for evidence, going into his house and seeing all of the different items he does have there and the collection he has, it would be very difficult, and you would need an expert in what you were looking for to accompany you to identify that specific item.
Well, one of the things that has always intrigued me about the contents of the chest is that there are no, to the best of my knowledge, Native American artifacts in the chest. There's a lot of items in there that are of Central and South American, and some Asian, some European, but I've never heard him describe anything as Native American inside that chest. So, Jonah, let me go to you.
Save the bracelet.
Pardon me?
Save the bracelet.
That's right. The bracelet is Native American, huh?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
If you believe the story about the mesa and coming down and finding those turquoise beads in the
Wetherell,
the
Wetherell beads.
Which, of course, if you read Wetherell, you know that there was no turquoise found at that site. It was all in Chaco Canyon where they found the turquoise, because there's no copper mines up there in Colorado in that area.
Which is where the turquoise comes from. So, Jonah, why the difference? Why, if he planned to hide it in 1988, did he end up waiting until 2010?
I think it was, when he realized that he was in remission and he was clear, one of the, the big impetus for doing it, I guess, was he was coming to the end of his life. Yeah. We know that he wanted to try and influence people 1,000 years, 100 years away. And I think it stands out that he wanted to have a legacy. I think he gets more of a legacy if it's found after he passes, and waiting till things are a bit clearer. It makes sense. It took time to get the poem right. I think he's a master of misdirection, and I think a lot of the work in the poem was actually taking you away from the actual solve. Otherwise, it's found too easily. So
we're going to have a big conversation when you get here the next time, John.
I might have it by then. No. The only other thing I want to say on that, I guess, was I seem to remember reading something where he said at the first sign of, I think he said dementia, that was a bit of an impetus to go and do it. And if anyone else knows where that quote is, I've read it on my travels. That would be another sign of him going, right, whilst I have control, I'm just going to have to go and do it. And I think that was probably one of the main reasons.
So, Christy, you were grinning like a Cheshire cat. That tells me that you have a thought on this matter. Tell me what you think.
I am going to totally steal the other answers. This is nice to go last. So exactly what Jonah said, 1988, it's because he lived. I mean, he was in remission, and I think Matt said it too. So that one's the easy one, but 100% spot on. I've never talked to Sean about it. It was the raid. I think the raid happened. There was some ugliness after the raid, and he had to get cleared. I think some things had been seen by some people, and he wanted it out of his house, and he wanted it in its special spot because either they could come back, it could ruin the game. I think he changed a few things after. I think that raid changed everything.
Really?
And Sean figured it out too. We so need to talk.
Let me go back to, so I have an opinion on the matter. It's a minor one, maybe just a little bit off. My opinion on why he chose. So we know why he didn't do it in 1988. He got better. He's told us that. Right. The reason I believe he selected 2010 was the fact that he was 80. And his good friend, Eric Sloan, got to 80, predicted for all intents and purposes his death. And I think Fenn had this connection with Sloan that had him sensing that his life was going to be a lot like Eric Sloan's. And I think he thought at that point, while he was still healthy before he finished that 80th year with a possibility that he might pass during that time, then that this was the time to hide the treasure. So, Shelley, we are at, let me see, 51. So let's go back and take a couple of questions from the room. First of all, I want to read a couple of quotes from, before I go to the questions. Joel Lewicki had said a couple of important things that he addressed towards us, and I want to say them just to have something to think about. Joel says, it is important to point out that he didn't want to go in an ordinary way. He wanted to go and have control over how, when, and where he went. He was determined to not let circumstance dictate. And I think that's very clear about his behavior. That's a very accurate representation. I think that's why I wanted to repeat it. So, Shelley, let me go back to your questions in the room.
Okay. Well, we have a question from Facebook. This is from
Facebook.
Brad Kinzer.
Oh, yeah.
And this is for K-Pro. Can you elaborate on your idea of the things we may be missing in the chest? What do you think we are missing?
That's the million-dollar question. I think that there's this surprise that he has said that's in there. I think the memoir that is potentially in there. And I think that there is not enough information currently out to know all. I mean, we know the number of what is the coins, we know the bracelet, we know a frog, we know there's 5 or 6 or 10 things that we know, but you look at how packed that is. And that's the other thing, is it's so packed, and Forrest took 2 trips. So I just feel there's something we're missing, and I'm going to be the first to say, I don't know what it is yet, but I think that's where the focus needs to be. I'll say that's where I'm going to focus in the off season, because I think that's what could break it loose. But do I know what the answer is yet? No. I'm looking at that high res picture going, what could it possibly be? I think there's something there, and I think if we could get it and get some more information to it, I think it'll break it loose.
So Matt, real quickly, because we're going to have to be wrapping up here in just a few minutes. Although I don't usually ask yes/no questions, do you agree with Christy's assessment? And if yes, what do you think the differences are?
Christy's assessment as to
there's something that may be provide intelligence in the difference between the chest that he configured in 1988 versus the chest that he configured in 2010.
Yeah, I think that that's probably true. I think that there's probably hints in kind of what she's alluding to is that there's hints in the contents I don't know why. Otherwise, he would have had to been so particular about exactly 256 gold double eagles, for example, the number of Krugerrands, the number of this, the number of turquoise stones, 22 in the bracelet, et cetera, et cetera. Why is all of that relevant? He gives us all of these details about these things and how he came about that bracelet from Harvey and so forth and so on. There's got to be clues in that, I think. I think that, and in those discrepancies over time, for example, I think there's big hints in the discrepancies in his own stories. For example, the jump off the bridge that he talks about.
In Once Upon a While?
Once Upon a While, he told that story first in the scrapbooks. And if you look at what the scrapbook says is the distance to the water, and you look at what's in Once Upon a While, there's a pretty big discrepancy there. Yeah. And if he just republished his scrapbook, why did the number change?
So
things like that.
Sean Martinez, short answer. Yes or no, do you agree with Christie's assessment? And if you do agree, what do you think might be the differences between the two?
Well, the contents of the chest, I do agree in a sense that as they evolved over time, I believe the contents grew just as Forrest did. And the things that were most precious, most important to him, things that would be fun, including the bracelet that was a part of him that he wore every day. I think that's very significant. I do also agree that the repetition, I know it was mentioned earlier, of the statements that he says, I think Jonah was talking about it, but his repetition of the same words or describing the same items in the chest that he may over time could have significance. When a person repeats themselves consistently, they're trying to tell you something. Now, a lot of people don't pick up on it. Most people, if any, I mean, nobody's found the chest, but you have to pay attention when a person repeats themselves over and over.
So is that also a protection mechanism? If I repeat myself, I was going to say if I repeat myself more than once, which is redundant, but if I repeat a story, is that a way of also ensuring that I don't make a mistake and change the story? That if I just keep repeating the same thing again?
Absolutely. To an extent, it could be a defense and a protection mechanism, saying it over and over and over again in that sense. However, he's to the point, I believe, where he has that script down, and when he needs to say that, he will. Everything else, everything other than that, is him having fun, and he knows what he's saying. So whenever he says something in response to a question that he's had time to think about, or an email that may be similar, and he tells you the same thing. For example, go back to my poem. Go back to the poem. When somebody asks him about where Warm Waters Halt is, like I asked him, which one's more important, what or where? And he told me, go back to my poem, and it says where. So just that repetition is important, and especially in this regard to the items that are in the chest. So the things he mentions prominently in the chest, pay attention to.
So, Jono, again, I'll repeat the question. Do you agree with Christy, yes or no, about her assessment that there's something about the differences? And if you do agree, what do you think those differences are?
Yes, I do. I said before that I think Fenn's the master of misdirection, and from what I read in the scrapbooks and everything I've done for the past 4 months, I would urge people to be careful looking at his right hand while he's pulling the rabbit out with his left hand. So the thought, there's a counter there that if he keeps saying these things, what isn't he saying? And one thing I would say is on the coins he says double eagles and single eagles, they're called. He doesn't mention, when you look at them, I noticed Queen Elizabeth II on some of the coins. He doesn't mention that at all. Could there be something in that, for example? So I'd say not only what he does say, but what doesn't he say? Or what is he doing with his left hand?
Well, London is 8.25 miles north of Santa Fe, if you were to go all
in the Rockies.
Okay, last question for the night before we get to closing. This is a yes, no. Matt, is the treasure hidden in New Mexico?
Yes.
Christy, is a treasure hidden in New Mexico?
Yes.
Shelley Carney, is a treasure hidden in New Mexico?
Obviously.
Sean Martinez, is a treasure hidden in New Mexico?
Absolutely.
And Jono Jones, is the treasure hidden in New Mexico?
I think it probably is now, yeah.
After that one trip to Yellowstone. All right, so for once we all agree on something. So you in the room, of course, do not have to agree. These are our opinions. And if there's one thing that makes America great, we have the opportunity whenever we wish to express our opinions, right or wrong. Hopefully you have facts that support your opinions, but it's okay if you don't. You still have the right. So let's go around the room. Start with you, Matt. Tell people where they can find you on the internet.
Yeah, I can be reached at BrewerAerial.com. You can reach me there and take a look at some of my drone footage, and you can shoot me an email and so forth on that site.
So when are you coming to Albuquerque so we could go up north and shoot some drone footage in those beautiful places? Come springtime.
Definitely in the springtime. I might do one more trip. I might put boots on the ground one more time coming up in the next month or so.
Well, let's use those drones to go find cool places to hide those silver coins.
Yeah, we could do that.
It'll be fun.
Christy, where can they find you?
Hint of Riches. It's a forum to discuss all things related to the hunt. And then the Raven's Nest, Monday nights at 7 o'clock. Mike Calazar, who I think is in the room, hello. We do a little show, and we might be popping up occasionally other times with some topics that we want to throw out.
Mm-hmm. Shelley Carney, where can they find you?
Well, of course, you can find me on Gypsy's Kiss and my own channel, thesofterside.me.
Yeah. Sean Martinez.
Sean Martinez, Figuring Out Forrest on YouTube, Facebook, and at gmail.com. I'm hoping to put boots on the ground again, hopefully 2 more times before the end of the year.
Wow.
I just talked to a friend who was up north of Santa Fe doing an elk hunt. They did get an elk. There were dozens of hunters out there. Of course, they're very well outfitted for the weather.
That kind of weather, yeah.
But you do have hunters that are still out there in the same areas that
we're looking for treasure. Yeah, we see them all. Come the season, we see them all the time. Jonah, where can they find you?
Brit Chaser on YouTube and Hint of Riches, and you can email me jonojones78@gmail.com.
Thank you. So you guys know where you can find me. I'm at gypsyskiss.tv along with my partner, Shelley Carney. You also know that we have a blog at gypsyskiss.com. Those are our 2 main properties, although we do have presence on Facebook, Twitter. I don't know. I can't remember. Oh, and we do have our new podcast at anchor.fm under A Gypsy's Kiss. So there is one last thing I wanted to say before we leave. If you would like to donate to Carissa's campaign, there's a link in the description box below. So first of all, I want to thank our panelists for this evening. Just love the discussion as usual. I hope you guys found it as informative as I did. To those of you who are moderating in our chat room, including my partner, Shelley Carney, thank you very much for your work. We really appreciate it. And for those of you who are in the chat room and have come by to visit us, I want you to know that we know you have a lot of choices when it comes to how you spend your time on YouTube, and we hope we provide you a credible alternative. We continue to try, and we'll always do so for you. We will see you tomorrow, Thursday at 1 p.m. Shelley won't be with me. She'll be traveling, as she mentioned earlier, to her daughter's wedding out in Virginia. We're going to recap our Thrill of the Chase book club, and I'll have some news for you about where we head from here, okay? So, let me grab my outro here to make sure. New outro for you all. Again, thanks for joining us. Panel, have a good evening.